Holy Grail, Dr. Jones?
Oh, rats.
The movie begins with a flashback of Indiana Jones as a supple young boy. It explains where he gets his look, his fear of snakes, his whip, and even his chin scar too. I remember the day I got my look, developed a fear of needles, learned how to play the trombone and got my appendix removed. I think we've all had a day of our lives as formative as this. We return to the present as an adult Indy retrieves the cross he lost as a kid and returns to his adoring students to find a mysterious package on his desk. Our latest antagonist, Walter Donovan, whose name is so boring I'm going to refer to him as Wernstrom from now on,
Wernstrom!
sets Indy up in search of the Holy Grail that was being pursued by Indy's own father, who is now missing. We head to Venice, meeting our eye candy for the movie,
Dr. Elsa Schneider.
and Indy opens the package, which turns out to contain Indy's father's notebook. Following some clues that leads us to a literal X marking the spot, Indy and Elsa head into some spooky catacombs filled with rats.
Oh, rats.
They discover a clue to the Grail's whereabouts, but are attacked by some fez-wearing assassins who tell them where Indy's father is. After a quick bit of Scottish improv, I find this highly offensive, Indy stealthily finds dear old Dad. They briefly reminisce before getting served a double cross from Wernstrom and Elsa, losing the notebook in the process. Dad tries to burn them alive, and they have some wacky shenanigans with a rotating fireplace before they escape on a motorcycle and sidecar. Why does he pop a wheelie when he has a gun? They nip to Berlin to get the notebook back, getting Hitler's signature in the process, before boarding a Zeppelin, a convenient biplane, and an even more convenient car to get back on the trail of the Holy Grail. Dad gets himself captured, along with Marcus Brody. The less said about Marcus the better, leaving Indy to fight a small army and an old-ass tank with a tiny pistol and a pissed-off horse. Oh, and Salah from Raiders of the Lost Ark is there too. Indy takes down the tank, nearly dying in the process, before they all head to the Holy Grail's resting place. Dad gets shot by
Wernstrom!
leaving Indy with no choice but to recover the Grail to save his life. Indy conquers the trials and
Wernstrom!
drinks from a grail without getting someone to test it first, dying horribly. Indy brings the real Holy Grail back to Dad to save him before Elsa tries to get them all killed by taking the Grail over the threshold of the cave. Apparently you can only be immortal in this cave or something. Elsa plummets to her death, trying to get the Grail, while the rest of the gang escape the cave-in. Indiana's real name is confirmed to be Henry Jones Jr., and we learn Indiana was his dog's name. Are you kidding me? Before they all ride off into the sunset on horseback. Harrison Ford returns as the movie's protagonist, Indiana Jones, for a third time and delivers another definitive performance of the character. Bold, cocky, and great with the ladies, Indiana Jones is a character of a bygone age where men were hardy, grizzled, and not afraid of anything, except maybe snakes. His fists never tire and his erection never softens. Indiana Jones is a man with credible strengths, but also believable weaknesses. He pursues his father's kidnappers despite the friction between him and his father. He risks his own life to save his father after he gets shot. He even risks his own life to try and save Elsa from death, despite her betrayal of him. The only issue with this movie for the character of Indiana Jones is that it reveals too much about him. The allure of a good character is the mystery behind them, leaving the audience to wonder and speculate on how they develop their worldview, their skills and their weaknesses. By summing up this character into one day, it feels cheap and unearned. Also, although this movie is made to be a character study of a father-son relationship, it really doesn't do anything particularly interesting with Sean Connery, who's barely 10 years older than Harrison Ford, as Indy's father, but more on him later. As far as an antagonist, Walter Donovan, played by Julian Glover, is pretty forgettable. Prior to this movie, he was famous for driving AT-ATs and taking down the Rebel Alliance on Hoth, but since then he's not really upped his game. I mean, he's a bad guy, bribing dignitaries and associating with Nazis, but his motives for why he's pursuing the Holy Grail are pretty weak. Immortality is obviously appealing, but not if he's going to spend it playing backgammon and hosting retirement parties. I mean, if he was dying of old age or some terminal illness that would necessitate the need for expediency for finding the Holy Grail, then you could maybe make him into a sympathetic villain. Instead, he's just some bad dude, with old school bad guy monologues.
Which one is it?
That's good, is it? What's good about that?
He's not even around for most of the movie. This would be fine if he chewed the scenery when he was around, but he's kinda just there in every scene. He leaves his henchmen to do most of the dirty work for him. He shoots Sean Connery, but after what he does with Elsa, I sort of think that's fair enough. He doesn't really have any chemistry with Elsa thinking about it. Not that she needs another man to bed, but it kind of undermines your leadership position if the opposition has bedded your right-hand woman more times than you have. Really, the only interesting thing he does is die, but I care so little about him that you could replace him with a CGI monster and it wouldn't make any difference to me. Okay, let's start with Sean Connery as Indiana's dad.
Junior?
He's a religious hardnut, obsessed with finding the Holy Grail, and is a really emotionally poor parent. Although he is of a certain school of self-reliance and self-ownership that the self-entitled snowflake generation of today could take a lesson from. On the other hand, he also manages to shoot down his own biplane by accident and puts Indy and himself in mortal danger multiple times throughout the movie. The original character of Indiana's father was heavily changed by Sean Connery compared to Steven Spielberg and George Lucas's original version of him. He was meant to be a sort of Yoda guiding figure, but instead he's a clod and a womanizer. Sean Connery's influence is most apparent in the decision to have Indiana Jones and his stepdad sleep with the same woman. This was 100% Sean Connery's idea. George Lucas was openly against this idea, and this is the guy who had siblings making out in one of his own movies. It's messed up, man, and I'll show you why.
Let's pretend like this peanut butter is Indiana's mum. This jam is Elsa, and this Nutella is Elsa's butthole. Now let's imagine that this knife is Henry Jones Sr. and this knife is Indiana Jones. Oh, hello there. Oh, Mrs. Jones. Oh, you're too good to me. Oh, Mrs. Jones. Oh, hello. Oh, nice to meet you. Oh, yes. Take some of that. Oh, get in there as well. Yes. Oh, I've had my fill. Oh, hey, baby, you want to do the Kessel Run with me? Oh, it's nice to meet you. Oh, it smells like peanut butter in here. Yeah, now let's go in there as well. Oh, God, what's wrong with me?
Moving on, we have Dr. Elsa Schneider, played by Alison Doody, who's a blonde honey carried over the humping rats before getting humped herself. Hi-oh! Who turns out to be a Nazi. The actress herself was a 23-year-old Irish woman playing a 28-year-old Austrian scientist, so credit to her voice work. The character beds Indy and his father, which the very idea of which makes me want to but she's also uncomfortable enough with the regime to let Indy have the notebook back, so maybe she has some redeemable qualities. No. Ultimately, she dies after taking the Grail beyond the threshold and trying to reach for it. A pretty bad character overall, to be honest. Then we have Marcus Brody, played by Denholm Elliott, who's the sidekick who sucks at keeping guard, sucks at blending in, sucks at avoiding being captured, and sucks at riding horses. The fez-wearing assassins, whose job it is to protect the Holy Grail at all costs, don't seem too threatening, and don't seem to protect the Grail at the source, which seems a bit odd. John Rhys-Davies returns as Salah, who also wears a fez in this, oddly enough. He steals some camels before making a break for it. I mean, okay, he comes back to save Dad, but otherwise, another fairly forgettable performance. Lastly, I'll mention Michael Byrne, who played the Nazi General Vogel. I had to Google him to find out his character's name, who is yet another standard issue bad guy who at least gets a cool death when his tank gets driven off a cliff. Otherwise, another one to forget. The visual effects in this movie are freaking excellent. Do you know why? Because it's almost all real things that have been used for filming. Very little scenes use CGI in this movie. There are movies that will come out in 2021 that won't look as realistic as this one. Saying that, this movie was made back in the good days when you could just visit other countries and see new things. The opening scene is filmed in the Arches National Park near Moab, Utah. Meanwhile, the initial scene on the boat is on a studio set in Elstree Studios in London in the UK. A lot of the movie is shot on location in Venice in Italy, despite the protests of the cinematography guys, because doing this caused issues. Not least of all because they had to edit out all the TV aerials from the shots. But man, what a beautiful city to shoot in. The rats in the catacombs are actual rats that the studio bred themselves. to ensure they didn't have rabies or any other diseases that could affect the actors. That look on Elsa's face in this scene, that's a real rat pulling at her hair. That's not acting. When the fire starts, the real rats are replaced with some hilarious models, including a couple of robotic swimming rats. But the transfer is quite quick, allowing your suspension of disbelief to take over. The castle interior is filmed again on a set in London, with gas lines set up to give the illusion of an out-of-control fire, while also starting an actual out-of-control fire in the room too. When they escape from the castle, stuntmen ride on these motorcycles, crashing into each other and popping wheelies and shit. Back before health and safety ruined everything, they actually built 2 tanks for the scenes in the desert and play out lots of the scenes with stuntmen and even some with the real actors, to ensure that a sense of realism and danger is conveyed to the audience. CGI is used when the tank drops off the mountain, and it looks okay for this one moment. The exterior for the Holy Grail location is the Al-Khazene, hopefully said right, in Petra, Jordan, a giant ornately carved sandstone temple which dates back to the 1st century. The internal locations for the Holy Grail were all produced on a studio set, and were all constructed by highly skilled painters, builders and plasterers. The invisible bridge was hand-painted by artist Paul Houston to only be visible from a specific angle. A lot of the scenes used miniatures and models and were extremely difficult and intricate to create. The death scene of Donovan was done using 3 puppets in hot air to produce this decaying effect, which still haunts my nightmares. The only scenes that don't really hold up today are when Indy and Dad are outside of the Zeppelin, which looks fake as shit, and the scene with Indy and Dad in the biplane, which looks horrendous. But overall, it's not bad for a movie that was made over 30 years ago. Rather than using pre-existing sound effects from the studio library, a lot of the Indiana Jones sounds were derived by a sound designer, Ben Burr. A lot of the animal noises were created using unexpected sounds. Rats in real life don't really make that much noise, so he added the sound of some irritated chickens, put those sounds onto a keyboard, and played some of the high range notes to derive the sound of what they thought rats would sound like. Near the end of the movie, when the cave-in is occurring, the earthquake sounds are created by rubbing a balloon together. Sound design was a key component of the Indiana Jones movies right from Raiders of the Lost Ark. Things like the whip crack involved Harrison Ford going out into the studio car park and cracking a real whip, with additional recordings being done in quieter locations too, by the sound designers until they had the sound they were looking for. The gun sound was actually a 30-30 Winchester rifle rather than any kind of handgun, and it sounds so satisfying hearing this for the gunfire. A lot of effort and experiments went into creating the punching and body blow sounds too. Initially they started by beating on me, before taking a load of leather jackets and baseball gloves and whacking them with baseball bats to create the library of hit noises for all of the Indiana Jones films. I always enjoy the punching effect in this movie. It's not how a punch sounds, but it's the kind of noise I would have used to make when I punched one of my friends. Now I make Dragon Ball Z noises instead. The music, just like the visual effects for this movie, are exceptional. It's no wonder it won an Oscar for its musical score. The theme song is iconic, and an orchestral score is used throughout the movie to help accentuate the feelings of excitement and triumph that the movie is trying to convey. John Williams, who also produced the score for the 2 previous Indiana Jones movies, and worked on other epics like Jaws and Star Wars, returns to create the music for this movie. Right from the start of the movie, the music supports scenes like when young Indiana is running from the bandits. There's roughly 55 sync points in just 4 minutes of music. I have no idea what that means, but it certainly sounds impressive. Many of the scenes benefit from variations on the main Indiana Jones theme, particularly near the end of the movie, when Indy's dad calls him Indiana for the first time, when he's reaching for the Holy Grail, telling him to let it go.